Good to see folks. Tonight, I thought what we do is look at one of my favorite players and perhaps a couple of his games from 1946. Bruce and Chris may know these games. Jacob probably won't know the games, but after this, you'll know the games. And they're famous for many good reasons, I think. Bronstein was born in 1924. He died in 2006. He was really one of, I think it was Bobby Fischer who called him one of the great Soviet supermen of chess by the 1950s and 60s. He really helped to redefine modern chess. But if you talk to Bronstein in his own lifetime, you would have thought, or he would have said, yeah, sure, he's a Soviet player, but he was also a Ukrainian player, and he liked to represent Ukraine and its school of chess, which was developed after the First World War, according to these players, and the name Isaac Boleslavsky is often associated with this school of chess. So we're going to see two games that really are typical of Ukrainian players, at least players that define themselves as Ukrainian school of chess players, and they're quite aggressive, dynamic kinds of chess. I think that are well worth appreciating, studying. You'll learn a lot from this approach to chess. Among the many things Bronstein was known for, he drew a match with Mikhail Botvinnik, the titan of Soviet chess, in 1951. I won't go into the politics of that. I've listed a couple of openings that Bronstein was particularly associated with. We're going to see the sort of King's Indian, Old Indian defenses played by Bronstein, often with great enthusiasm and dynamism. And he really, as I say, helped to revise people's understanding of these systems and turn them into real weapons that people like Mikhail Tal, a future world champion, F.M. Geller, Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, they all played these kinds of systems. I'm a historian. I'm always interested in the context of these people's lives. Bronstein lived, as all these Soviet players did, through very, very difficult period of history. And he was, I think, well known as one of the great courageous personalities in Soviet chess, where often politics could be quite nasty, as they were around Victor Korchnoi's defection in the 1980s, where Bronstein refused to join other Soviet grandmasters and denounce Korchnoi, who was, of course, a great rival to Anatoly Karpov in this period. So there are a lot of reasons to be interested in this man and his contribution. So I'm going to switch over now to the chess side of things. Come back here. Let's see, over here. And we will hopefully get to the game. And I'm still here, yes, all right. Let me just make sure that we've got everyone. Okay. If anyone's having trouble seeing anything, please jump in and let me know. Otherwise, I will carry on. Hopefully everything is working well on your end too. So we looked at some games in the past week or two, which certainly were Pawn to Queen 4 games, but they featured games were more traditional classical defenses. The Ukrainian school that we're talking about here with Bronstein looked at what we might call a dark square strategy, rather than building, I'll go back here, building structures that featured black pawns coming out on the white squares and building a kind of barrier along white squares. and perhaps contesting this square directly. Um, the systems that we associate with, this is known as the Old Indian variation. I won't go into why it's called an Indian variation here, but it's very much part of this Old Indian, King's Indian. It's useful to begin to think about chess in some ways as a battle of color complexes. So sometimes players like to place their pawns on white squares and try to get a sturdy foothold in the center that way. And other times they choose black squares. And it does matter a little which kind of system you're going to approach in terms of the clash of interests in the center. One thing I will point out to right away is we've talked already about the importance of these sensitive points in both sides' camps. And one thing that you might think about the white square strategy when black is if we come back here and playing his pawns perhaps this way, is he's building a barrier to that square along this line. And for that reason, it's sometimes thought to be a safer kind of option. When black chooses to play this way, in some ways he's saying, I'm not going to worry about defending this square as such, but I am going to start putting pressure on black squares. Because black squares, if I can get the initiative, if I can get control of the position, may lead us to the white king. Rather than worrying about my king, I'm going to make white worry about his king. So it does have a kind of embedded difference of tone, I would say. It's not that you can't attack with a white square strategy. Of course, we've seen wonderful games already where that was conducted a little bit later. It's just that the kinds of attacks you see are somewhat different because of the pawn complex. That is, the complex of pawns in this sort of formation. We're going to see Bronstein work on this in this game. Now, his opponent here is a very famous player, Bachmann, a strong player. This game is played in 1946, right after the Second World War. Very, very difficult time for all of these people in their societies. Nonetheless, the authorities tried to get some joint endeavors going. I'll put it that way. And we have a big chess tournament in Hungary as a result, and this is in round 2 of the tournament. Now, I've not been talking very much about the opening. All of these moves look sensible and healthy. White's got more space, and black is basically setting up to try to fight on fight this point on the in the center. Now, many white players today might have advanced this pawn forward and left the black pawn sitting here on e5. But Bachmann plays a move which looks more or less sensible. He wants to develop his bishop here and support this structure. It looks healthy enough, and it is healthy enough if you have time. And that's one of the things that this so-called Ukrainian school is focusing on here, is taking away time or rushing white, trying to keep him from getting his perfect setup. So now we see, instead of letting white move the pawn forward, black has exchanged in the center. Now he's given white a good square in d4. This is a nice square for the knight. But what he's got in exchange is now this bishop has a long diagonal to look at, because there are no pawns obstructing its view. His pawn is no longer there obstructing the view. So you can say that there's some real dynamic potential here. There's a bit of a weakening whenever you put your pawns on white squares. Your black squares get weaker. It's just the way the chessboard works. And what's happened here is that black is positioned a rook here, he's got a knight here and a knight here, all hitting this pawn. So attacked 3 times, defended twice. So we've got a little bit of punch already in the black position. White can defend easily enough. And now black plays a move that's very much part of this whole structure. If you can get away with it, trying to secure this square so this knight can sit here without being chased away by a pawn, and also making this rook more active. And we're going to see that this pawn has a big future, and this rook has a big future. And it's basically going to march up the board and try to destabilize the white queen side, attacking all these squares. Black's bishop is pointed here. We're going to soon find the black queen over in this part of the board. It's all part of basically a strategy which says, I'm not going to let white rest. If I let white rest, if I play quiet moves, white has more space. He has very good pieces. If I don't disturb their coordination somehow, I'm going to be worse. And eventually white is going to be able to attack, move his pawns forward, probably get a pawn to here at some point or here, perhaps play here, and suddenly you've got a big pawn roller coming up the board. It's black. And black players had lots of experience getting crushed by a white avalanche here, so they know they have to play quickly, and Bronstein is certainly quite able to do that. Here it comes. He's simply pushing forward. More or less, the general view in this game is that had this pawn chased the knight, this pawn would have chased the bishop. Could have been very awkward then for white to unlock his position. So the timing of all this is key. It's a difference between the great players and the rest of us, that they usually get this timing right. C6 is a nice move. It starts to get some control of squares that the white knights might like, and it creates an avenue, very typical avenue in the King's Indian for the black queen, which is now going to look at this, but also look at this. So this is what we would call a kind of complex, a whole arrangement of pieces that work very well together around this pawn structure. And it's one of the kind of rules of harmony in chess, is that the pawn structure and the pieces have to work together to get the most out of the position. And that's what Bronstein is working at here. Now, thousands of games feature this kind of setup for black, where all of the pieces that you see on the squares you see, and where Bronstein's going to put them. Most of those games occur after Bronstein's games are become well known. And that's one of the reasons to study these older games, is Bronstein didn't invent this, but he certainly was one of the great practitioners of this kind of approach to the game. And when I show you, if I get time and show you the second game, you're going to see many, many similar kinds of ideas floating. Now, Pachman decides to get his bishop away from this square. This square, it's now protected. So he's a cautious grandmaster. He understands that there are threats in the position, and so he moves his bishop away. His problem is that there are rather more threats than he would like in this position. And we see the black piece is taking up very active position. The only piece, this is very typical of the King's Indian, the only piece that sort of sits at home and it doesn't appear to be doing much is the C8 bishop. So this rook now has got lots of squares to roam. This rook is working. The knights are on good squares, attacking elements. The bishop is pointed at the central complex here. And now the queen has got a dual purpose hidden behind this knight, all kinds of potential here for activity on the part of the black position. Pachman plays what looks to be a very quiet, safe move. Keep a knight or a bishop away from g4. Remember, you don't want pieces showing up that might hit this square. So it looks like a sensible idea. And since the knight can't go to g4, which would really like to go, it can threaten to go other places. Maybe it comes here, and then this is a soft square because the bishop is sitting over on this square. But actually, Bronstein has another idea, which is very, very common in these kinds of positions. He's going to reroute his knight, and it now can come to this square to challenge this knight. Or sometimes you play the knight here and the knight here, and you start to bother the white king. So knights, I mean, are very flexible pieces. If they can find good squares, if you take some away, like h3, this move took away that square, that's fine. We'll just find another route to try to move the knight forward. Bronstein isn't so worried about the b4 push in these positions. The problem, one of the problems in white's setup here is that once b4 happens, it's all well and good, but it does leave this pawn weak in the end. And there are lots of examples where that comes back to injure white players. So Pachman starts playing very cautious looking moves, solid looking moves, but then he's hit with this shot. And so if I just go back, rook d2 looks like it's solving all the problems on the black squares, which is fair enough as long as this bishop is alive. But Bronstein decides to get rid of this bishop. And now we start to see all kinds of other potentialities in this. This knight is hit. This knight is looking at this pawn. These rooks are on squares that if a knight lands on b3, we have a lovely fork. So we get all kinds of combinations now possible because basically taking with the rook here has drawn this rook into the line of fire of both the bishop and a potential knight fork. So it's not a hard exchange sacrifice to make in that sense. Oh, welcome, we got another person joining us. Sorry I didn't get you right away, but we're a little ways in, but it's being recorded, so you can at some point go back and listen to what perhaps you've missed along the way. So big sacrifice on a1 by the rook. And now things start to happen that are not so very hard to understand. Now we get a big fork with the knight on here, and we get this queen now really looking at this square, and when the queen is looking at this square, suddenly we start to get a lot of weak squares, all on black squares. As I mentioned earlier, they fight on the black squares early on, and they're trying to open up these diagonals, either this one, which we've already seen, or this one. And in this game, you get to see both things working. So a fork here, white moves his rook away, takes the weak d6 pawn. And instead of grabbing the rook, Bronstein instead lunges in with his queen. Not so worried about this, because if we were to move the queen here to take the knight, which looks possible, the queen would take the pawn with check, hitting the king, and we have a double attack. A loose piece falls off, right? An unprotected rook is always in danger here. So one of the things we've been talking about in some of these earlier sessions is how common these kinds of tactics are, right? So he's not worried about this knight. He's more interested in breaking up the pawn shield around the king. And he knows the knight can't be taken right away in any case. So small tactic, but great players play small tactics all the time. So he takes that knight. Now he's going to almost certainly lose this knight. But he is not worrying about this. He's still stripping the white king of his shelter. And there goes the c pawn. So the whole of the black strategy here has been to destroy the stability of that very, very solid looking queen side, which began with removing this bishop that was sitting here and then unleashing all of these pieces. Now, if we look at the sort of material, and again, we could do this count. If we could see very closely, it says Bronstein is up +2 here in terms of material count, and that's certainly true, but that's not the most important thing, really. The most important thing is that king safety is really terrible. It's practically a naked king. And so in combination with the fact that for the rook that he sacrificed, he now has a knight and what, 3 pawns, maybe in the end 4 pawns if we win this one and lose one of those, is a lot of material for a rook versus knight, way more than is needed for a grandmaster to win a game. So he's in the driver's seat, and now Pachman is just trying to cover up. He gets to snap this pawn. Bronstein gets his rook out into the game, and the game is going to end rather quickly here. This check, it really puts white in a very difficult position. Any king move to here or here will lose this rook, right? Or yes, this rook be very bad, or the queen, because of the rook check here. So can I play this? Let's see. If I play here, we can check here, and now we get attacks here, and we're going to get an attack here. It's going to be a nightmare for white to hang on in this position, attack here. And often what's going to happen is when white blocks with queens, this rook is going to have this square or this square. So Pachman in this position, I mean, the best line I think I found was, let's see, if we go back, is to come here. And then I think, yeah, we played something like this. And bring the knight forward. And it's true that this rook's going to move away to safety, but we're going to have a rook coming in, a knight coming in, and a knight either coming here or here. This pawn will fall. And there's really not much doubt in Pachman's mind that a player of Bronstein's caliber is going to win this game. I'm going to go back through the game just very quickly so you get, I'll go right to the start, get a little bit of an impression of how this structure is in a way blown up by Black's pieces. And I want to emphasize how on one hand it looks very solid, and against lesser players it probably would work very well. But once we get this happening, we get a combination that just blasts the structure of white completely away. And it's all about activity, really. Utilizing the pawns, utilizing the open lines, be afraid to sacrifice material to get your other pieces more active, stripping away the shelter of the king. It's very, very big impact of the black setup in this game. I'm going to see if I can set up another game without. Yes. So that game occurred in round 2 of a tournament. This is a short game that should remind you, Bronstein again is black. So we get much the same setup, slight variations. This is in round 6 of the same tournament. And you'll recall that in the first game, white managed to get this pawn move in to keep the black knight away. In this game, Zita does not manage to do this and walks into the same problem. Lots of pins. So if king takes, do I have this? If king takes, knight takes on b3, this knight cannot move because of the queen. The queen is hit by this knight, and the rook is hit by this knight, and the bishop is hitting the knight. Very bad news. Right? It's one of the classic ways in which these positions are detonated by black players. And queen takes allows a fork here with the knight, allows which then uncovers the queen and the bishop. Or if you prefer, yeah, I think that's the best one. The knight takes is less can't. Well, yeah, you could do it. Could you do it? It's not as strong. Yeah. So knight d3 looks much stronger. White player was a decent player. He just walked into a very, very big combination. But what I want you to, in a way, understand is that when you study a player's games and study the openings they play, you can study the combinations that come out of these games. So here are two top-level players playing the white side in the same tournament. Bronstein wins a really big, impressive game against one of the leading players in Hungary, in the Czech-Hungarian camp of grandmasters in round 2. So his game was known, and yet still Zita somehow walks into the same combination. Now he decides to try to cover up on the black squares. So he protects this square. He blocks this diagonal. So he's trying to, in a way, repair some of the damage. I don't know how long he thought about that move, but it was, again, putting this knight back here. The same kinds of problems exist. If you take it now, this knight falls, and then the bishop will be here looking at this, and this knight will be able to take that. Again, look at all the squares I'm highlighting, all the black squares there. And this rook is still being looked at by this bishop. This is not, in a way, not accidental. This is what comes out of these kinds of structures for players playing these systems. And if you want to play some interesting chess that is thought to be kind of counterattacking chess, this is one way to go about doing it, is to adopt systems that are sharp, that have, you give white something and then you try to take it away. That's basically what black does. You give white a big center with the pawns all here, and then you counterattack. It's a risky strategy if you don't play with great energy, but a lot of the junior players, top junior players, well, all of the top junior players, Alpheus plays this as black, Daniel Gong plays this as black, Alan Fan plays this as black. All the strongest junior players in New Zealand play this sort of system as black because it's got high energy and requires a lot of accuracy on the part of white players to handle it. It's coming back to the other thing that should be clear is if you're not being able to take this piece, your king is quite unsafe. Now this pawn is being multiple attacked again. And because of the pin on the knights through this square, all of black's pieces are working wonderfully well. So once the shelter, the king, is broken in these positions, it's very, very hard to cover up. And white does not manage it here. Check. Back. Again, this square is just dying. Protects against the threat white has made on f7, where you don't have a rook, this rook, so your back rank is a little bit weak for a counterattack, but Bronstein is not worrying very much about that. He reinforces the knight. He's still got lots of activity here. And white tries to counterattack by going deep into black's position. There's not very much that can be done here. And what's very nice about this kind of arrangement for you to see is Bronstein's understanding of the great flexibility of this queen, right? Yeah, maybe it's coming here, but maybe it's going there and there, right? Queens on an open board like this with powerful pieces, a knight that's protected by a pawn, bishop pointing. This bishop is doing very little except containing the activity of the white pieces. There we go. So white tries to defend and decides that there's no real defense here. Probably quite right. One of the more likely lines that you're going to see here is this. Comes back. Remember, the queen is protecting, and we don't even care about this. You just play here and then ask white what's his next move. Right. So this is command control sort of thing. You don't worry about things that aren't important, right? This problem is huge. This problem is huge, and that all leads to a victory in the final analysis. How many pieces we leave on pre doesn't matter if the king is going to be eaten. Bronstein was very adept at playing this sort of game. Bobby Fischer took up the King's Indian. Hugh Fisher was born in 1943. By the mid 1950s, Fischer was already a strong player in the United States, not at Bronstein's level, to be sure, but he was watching these kinds of games, studying these kinds of games. This is one of the reasons why he took up this whole system. And one of the things that Fischer said about chess, repeated over and over again, so I might as well say it again, is in order to get something in chess, you've got to give something. And one of the things that black does here is he gives white the center and then he counterattacks. As long as you keep that in mind when you're playing these sorts of systems, you have a reasonable chance of getting some turnaround in the game. Because once that center dissolves, the black pieces come to life. So both these games played in the same tournament, the same sacrifice made on A1 against very strong players, and both of them collapse very quickly. Studying these kinds of games, you will see the same tactics used, and you can repeat them. There's nothing magical about it. This is the way chess works. And the great players studied other people. Bronstein learned from others, and you can learn from Bronstein. So I recommend his games to you if you want to learn how to attack the kings. He's one of the great attacking players of the Soviet era. Anyway, I will stop there. Happy to have questions if you want to ask any questions. Feel free. And otherwise, we'll probably post this recording, and you can go back through it, look at the game yourself, plot it out. on a chessboard, follow on a chessboard, and see what you make of it along the way. So I'll just stop the recording now.